Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Jordan Tatum 1, and I'm super curious to see with kind of how crazy the design elements are in the Tatum 1, how these do complement Jayson Tatum's game, and can they complement yours as well? So let's get into it. Now, the Tatum 1 is pretty eye-catching for a lot of different reasons. Number one, that giant TPU chassis around the forefoot of the shoe, the combined mid and outsole. But the thing that my eye gravitated toward right away was the underside of the uppers, all the way from the distal extent of the heel up to the proximal extent of the forefoot. So right in this midfoot area, the only thing holding your foot up is the uppers. It's acting as a hammock. You can see underneath of there, the strobel is stitched pretty ununiformly. There's all these different break points in the stitching, and that's to get that strobel board up over the medial and lateral sides of your foot to give a little bit more structural integrity to the foot. But when you read about all the reasons, that's a mouthful, but when you read about all the reasons that Jayson Tatum made the shoe and kind of designed the shoe the way he did, he wanted this shoe to have such intimate contact with the forefoot, because likes to play up on the balls of his foot all the time, likes to use his forefoot so much. And so I don't think he really cared about what was going on in the midfoot or rear foot. You know, from the midfoot of the shoe all the way to heel, I really think the shoe is basically just trying to complement the forefoot. So that's why they were able to take weight out from the rest of the shoe. But when you put these on, it is definitely a different sensation. You don't get that cushy feeling or anything like that when you go under there. You're basically just feeling almost canvas under your foot. It doesn't feel bad whatsoever, but it is different, and it is definitely a really different sensation than I've been used to in a shoe. But when you look at what Jayson Tatum has said about his inspiration for designing the Tatum 1, he has said over and over again he wanted a shoe that really had all of its tech in the forefoot, kind of all the best elements of the shoe in the forefoot, so that you could feel the ground in the forefoot but also get a lot of performance out of that. And so what Jordan Brand basically did was just take out the rest of the shoe and just design everything around that distal 1/3 of the shoe. Everything else just gets cut out to save weight and make it a lot lighter of a shoe and make you want to play up on the ball of that foot. Definitely feels like your foot's being cradled more than it is kind of supported from the bottom. It's not a bad feeling whatsoever. It's not uncomfortable, but it is definitely different. But getting into the side of the uppers that everybody actually can see, when you look at the weave and kind of knit of this on the microscope, it is a 2-layer upper. Now the top part is this really intricate woven layer. It's got a pretty regular knotted pattern with all these weaves coming in and out of these knots. But then as you go underneath of the top layer, that bottom layer is kind of a much tighter type woven material underneath of it, a much tighter TPU. Quite a bit of stability, especially with that TPU chassis integrating with it. The outsole or kind of combined mid and outsole tread coming up over that too. For a shoe as light as it is, it definitely feels very stable, especially like I said, in the mid and forefoot where the shoe is meant to be played. But when you look at the breathability of the Tatum 1, I was a little bit curious about this because number one, you definitely have an air channel underneath of the strobel board. However, you do have a much more robust strobel board, so that there's not as much breathing channels through there. It heated up 168 degrees and cooled down 81.7 degrees. Definitely not the best shoe I've tested this year. And I do think because of that dual layer upper, it does give you a ton of stability. However, with everything wrapping up around it and with that strobel being so robust, I do think that's what's holding on to a little more heat on these. And on the upper durability test, the Dremel 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. The Dremel does get through that first layer of the upper, it does not go through the second. However, because these are meant for hardwood rubberized quartz, I would say as long as you're not an extreme toe dragger, you probably should be okay. Now getting into the midsole teardown, this one was pretty interesting because there's really not a lot of midsole here. It's a combined midsole and outsole. Now what's interesting is this forefoot zoom air unit is really large. It covers mostly the medial forefoot. We're gonna be pushing off a lot. However, then you also have this TPU stabilizer underneath of that, which is connected all the way around the shoe. It gives a lot of support. What I found was the coolest part of the midsole though, and I'm showing it to you on the shoe that's not cut open, is that that TPU stabilizer comes back pretty far into the midfoot and connects right here, almost dead center in the midfoot, then it comes up into these wings here into the rear foot. And what I like about that is when you're pushing off the ground, your forefoot kind of engages that zoom air unit, but it's gonna load energy throughout that entire chassis going through the back of the shoe. So the whole shoe is kind of acting to springboard you up off the ground, which I like. So if you're Jayson Tatum wanting to play up on the balls of your foot a lot, wanting to use the balls of your foot a lot, the rest of the shoe is still doing some work for you. It's still giving you some kickback. It's still giving you some springboard effect. It's just that that energy is kind of flowing from front to back and then kicking back out the back side of the shoe, which I thought was a really cool design element and a really nice way to save weight in the shoe, but still maintain a lot of performance. And if you look at that Zoom plus TPU chassis on the single leg jump height test, got 22 centimeters of jump height. It's just very good. That's definitely in the elite territory for shoes. The only thing I do worry about is because that mid part of the shoe is not contacting anything. I'd say if you're a heavier player like me, someone who's a little more clunky with their footwork, if you're not super light on the balls of your foot, are you gonna push down through the uppers of that shoe and not be able to use all the tools of that forefoot? Like, if your technique isn't as good kind of on the jump shot, I think the better technique you have for jumping, I'd say the better these are gonna be for you. But getting into the largest part of the midsole, which is also part of the outsole, most of the Tatum 1 is covered in this injection molded foam. Now, what I found interesting is Jordan brand is calling this a ground contact foam. Now you see this elsewhere with Under Armour Flow Foam as well as Li Ning with their JB1. Now this ground contact foam does feel a lot like Under Armour Flow Foam on its outer surface. However, when you cut it open in half, it looks almost identical to Phylon on the microscope. I took a full bed Phylon Nike tennis shoe, compared to this. They look exactly the same. They feel exactly the same underfoot. It's definitely a little more of a dense foam setup. It kind of has to be. It should be dense foam if you're going to be putting it on any type of court surface. Even if it is indoor hardwood, it is going to start to wear down with friction and heat, right? Now, if you look at it on the bounce height test, it only got 30.5 centimeters of bounce height in that heel portion, that ground contact foam portion. But the more interesting part is that the zoom unit in the forefoot only got 39.5 centimeters of bounce height. And if you look at the zoom unit, it is very thin. It is a very broad zoom unit. It covers a lot of the forefoot of the shoe, but the meat and potatoes of it is a pretty thin zoom air unit. So you're not going to get a ton of pogo sticking out of that. Honestly, I think the thing that's doing the most for this shoe is the truss system, is that TPU chassis that's going all the way around the forefoot. I think that's what's loading the most energy there. I think the zoom unit is nice. It feels a little bit bouncy underfoot, but I would say it doesn't feel like those giant zoom air units that you see in some of like the little Braun line. But if you look at what Jayson Tatum said, once again, he wants ground contact, ground feel, and you can't get that with a giant zoom air unit. So for this shoe, I do think the thinner zoom air unit is the way to go if you want to get your feet to feel the ground and then use that TPU chassis around there to kind of create the lift that you want. And so for bounce and shock absorption on the universal rating system, I do want to make mention of this. I think for bounce, I'm going to give them a 4 out of 5 because, like I said, I think you really need to know how to use them to extract the most out of them. I think if you are somebody in kind of that elite territory, they're probably a 20 out of 5. However, for the rest of us mere mortals, it's going to be taken down a little bit. For shock absorption, though, I'm going to give them a 3.5 out of 5, just because I'm not certain over time, over 3-4 months of life into the shoe, does that upper start to kind of give a little bit and you might start to get some hot spots on the shoe. I think this shoe is really going to be operator dependent on, number one, how it's going to perform for you, but also the comfort of it over months and months of use. Now getting into the outsole tread, the Tatum 1, remember it is mostly just midsole foam. However, in the forefoot, you do get 2 tread pods, one under the ball of your foot, one up on the tips of your toes. Now what's interesting is this is just kind of an irregular wave pattern, but the really crazy thing is the durometer of these materials. The rubber comes in at 21.5 in the forefoot, which is nuts. That is a super hard rubber compound. You look at the outsole durability test, not even a millimeter of damage on that outsole rubber and in the forefoot tread pods. But if you look at the rear foot, you get about 2 millimeters of damage on like a 1 millimeter tread depth. It's just bottoming right through the midsole foam. So, these definitely are meant, like I said, for hardwood rubberized courts, and they are meant to be played up on the balls of your foot. However, if your footwork is really good, these might last you a while, which I thought was really interesting. And if you look at the speed capability, the Tatum 1 on the speed ratio, they came in at 2.77, which is pretty darn good. Most of that has to do with the weight of them being so low, not so much the bounce capabilities of the foam or the zoom air. What I noticed though is for these shoes being only just 2 pods of tread, they grip exceptionally well, even though that tread is a super hard rubber compound. However, you have to know where to lay down force on these shoes, where to lay down weight to grab traction. And I noticed with me when I did my little half court to baseline sprint test, I want to lay all of the shoe's traction down when I stop. I'm a bigger dude, so when I come to a stop, I want to use all the shoe has to offer me. On these though, you have to grab them in the forefoot, so you have to kind of know where to put your foot down. I noticed with me that the first time I did it, I kind of had to stutter step a little bit to kind of get my balance because I wanted to lay traction down in the heel and I just didn't want to do it. So the next time I did it and I knew what to do, these were incredibly quick on that turn. So going from high speed to low speed in these, they definitely corner very quick if you know how to use them. I do think that is pretty on brand, no pun intended, of these shoes. I think that you want a little bit more forgiveness. You want them to be able to transition from step to step pretty easily, almost like a boxer would with their shoes. You want to be able to kind of shuffle from step to step on these.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
So like I said, if you like that kind of footwork, you're going to love them. If you don't, you're going to be losing traction on them pretty quick because you're going to be looking for grip in the shoe where it just isn't there, where you might be used to it in other shoes. And looking at the fit of the Tatum one, pretty pleasantly surprised, as I have been with a lot of Jordan brand shoes recently in terms of fit. Narrow, medium, and wide foot, and just go true to size on these. This is not the EP or PF version that I've seen. This is just standard version, and it still is pretty forgiving. I would say if you're somebody with ball of foot pain, I think these are okay just because that Zoom Air unit is going to protect a lot of it. Plus that chassis kind of offloads that forefoot and kind of distal midfoot. Somebody with heel pain, because the midsole foam, like we talked about when we talked about the bounce height test on these, because that juts up so much in the heel of these, I'm not so sure these are great for heel pain. Any other type of snake bitten ailment like tendonitis, things like that, arch strain, because these aren't the best shoes for an orthotic because of the uppers, how they kind of wrap around the medial and lateral sides. But I think these are more of a performance shoe, kind of like the Wave Wade 808 family is. So if you do have an orthotic in these, it better be a pretty low profile one, and I'd probably try it first before you actually go out and play really hard in them with them. I know for me, when I tried to throw it in there, it just didn't feel right. There was just no solid base to put the orthotic on, and as we know, if there isn't a solid base for an orthotic to put in a shoe, then it's not really doing much anyway. So just keep that in mind when you're looking to buy these or not. But getting into the playability, the Tatum one, and are these really a great fit for Jayson Tatum and for you? You know, it's interesting. I went on Instagram and started looking at kind of edits of Jayson Tatum playing because although I've watched him play a bunch, I really didn't pay attention to his feet for some reason. I'm a foot doctor and I test shoes out all the time, but yet I never like really looked at if he was really playing up with the balls of his foot a lot. And he really does all the time. His jump shots are originated from the balls of his foot. He never rocks back whatsoever in his shots. And even when he's trying to create space for himself or make hezzy steps or step backs, he is always up on the balls of his foot or at least the distal midfoot. He really does not play the back on his heels whatsoever. And that's honestly such great footwork. That's such great fundamentals because you're always ready to kind of take that next really quick step. You're never getting caught flat-footed. So I would say if you've got the footwork of Jayson Tatum, or at least someone that has the fundamentals, then yeah, these are going to be phenomenal for someone who's a point or shooting guard trying to create space for themselves. I do love how light they are and how light they feel on court and just how they get out of your way as long as you give them what they want. If you do rock back on your heels or you are a little bit flat-footed or at least lazy with their footwork like I get a lot of the time, then yeah, you're not getting the performance out of them. You're not getting the grip of something else that has all that beefy outsole tread in the heel or kind of in the lateral flange or anything like that where it can kind of make up for some lazy footwork. So just make sure when you're using them that you're kind of respecting the design of the shoe when you put them on before you really assess if you like them or not. Because I noticed for me when I was thinking to myself, I'm not loving wearing these, I was thinking to myself, well, is it the shoe or is it me? And I think most of the time it was me. But I'd love to know your thoughts. You're looking for a shoe that has a little bit more of elite footwork in mind, or at least a shoe that almost wants to train you to move like Jayson Tatum, because that's definitely what I kind of think these are. Because he said he wants these to be for kids as well as adults. And I think if you are a kid looking to try to get better fundamentals, this shoe is going to definitely train you to do that because it's just not going to give you the performance if you're lazy in them. So I'd love to hear in the comments if you think that you would be a good match for them, so let me know down below. And if you want to see another sibling to the Jayson Tatum one, the brand new Nike Jaw one, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam, especially ground contact foam. See you in the next one.